He appeared among the passengers, yet he never should have been there. "Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Your comments mean the world to me. Let's step aboard." It had been raining since noon, a thin, dreary rain that did not drum so much as whisper on the zinc roofs, streaking the windows of the Quai des Orfèvres and blurring the outlines of the buildings on the far bank. Towards 7, the office grew hushed. The typist with the neat bun in room 3 clicked off her machine. 2 young inspectors argued quietly about the merits of a certain café near Saint-Michel, their voices dropping to a murmur when they passed Maigret's door. He had not lit the lamp. He liked the room in half-darkness when the light outside turned brassy. Papers lay in uneven stacks on his desk, the cornerstone being a case of petty embezzlement that had the dull taste of dust. The radiator ticked with a capricious rhythm. The Seine swollen moved beneath the windows like a velvet ribbon. He filled his pipe, tamped, struck a match. The first draw was too harsh, and he let the smoke curl in a lazy loop before opening the window a finger's width. Damp air slunk in, smelling faintly of cold iron. There hadn't been anything urgent all day. A pickpocket on the line 8, a boarder, at a modest hotel who'd vanished before paying for 2 weeks. Routine. It was the kind of day that slid like lukewarm water over his skin. He waited a while for the telephone to ring, not out of expectation so much as habit. It did not oblige. Around 7:15 he put on his coat and gently pulled the office door until the latch clicked. In the corridor, the concierge was wheeling out a tin bucket that left a wet path like a snail's trail. He nodded to her and she nodded back. The hall smelled of soap. He stepped into the evening and turned his collar up. He could have taken the bus, but the rain did not bother him, and the streets were like an old sweater he liked to wear when his stomach was heavy. He crossed the river and paused a moment under a bridge, watching the watery glow under the arches, where lovers sometimes stood, clinging to each other as if the damp could make them melt into one person. The wind pushed the rain sideways. Far off, a faint whistle, one of the stations. It slipped under his coat like a memory. He let his steps bring him along the boulevard de Sébastopol, where the shops were still open and the butcher's windows glistened. He stopped without thinking about it at a kiosk at the corner and bought an evening paper. The headlines were nothing. A minister had made a statement. A striker had been ordered back to work. Stars in a film had smiled for cameras. Somewhere warm and dry. He did not go home yet. He found himself, as rain will sometimes lead a man, drifting toward the broad, yellow-lit mouth of the Gare de l'Est. The hall was like a lung that breathed people in and out. Heat sat under the iron ribs of the roof. The night outside was a grey animal. Inside, a forest of coats steamed lightly, and the lights showed every drop on every hat brim. Porters pushed squeaking carts piled with trunks, whose labels were like postage stamps from some place one did not need to think about. The station had its own weather, coffee and coal smoke, and swayed dampness. A chestnut vendor had taken shelter. By one door, and the smell was the past. He moved without hurry along the edge of the concourse, pipe cooling in his hand, watching people the way some men watch water. There were the ones who travelled, a woman in a fox collar trying not to cry and failing at the corners of her mouth, a man with a red scarf and a stoic moustache, a boy conscript in a cap with his mother's hand gripping his sleeve as if he might float away. There were the ones who stayed, the clerk behind the glass stamping tickets and glancing at the clock, the policeman whose uniform never stayed dry above the knees, 2 girls with their hair wet at the nape despite the scarf, and there were the ones who did not fit either category. He noticed the man because he was like a smudge on the clean edge of a plate. 35, 40? Hard to say. Not tall, thin enough for his suit to have a little extra air in it, as if he could make himself smaller by lowering his shoulders. His hat was a felt of the kind anyone might own, but it sat too straight, the way a hat sits on a man who has no habit of taking it off. The rain had not found him. His shoes were dry, and that counted for something, because most pairs in that hall, especially on the men with modest wallets, wore a grey film and a dark rim where the water had soaked. Anne dried. The man hovered near the map of the suburban lines at first, then drifted closer to the departure board. He would approach the line where tickets were purchased, pause, pat the breast of his jacket, as if to check for something that was not there, and step aside when the queue surged. Twice a porter glanced at him with professional curiosity and moved on. A woman with a trapezoidal handbag brushed his sleeve and apologized. He smiled quickly, showing no teeth. Maigret did not decide to watch him. It was like noticing a draft in a closed room. He leaned his elbows on the marble counter of the buffet and asked for a beer. The glass left a ring on the marble. He drank in small sips, eyes following the indolent sweep of the big station clock. He felt the simple satisfaction of his body warming like a loaf set near the oven door. The man had no luggage, not even a newspaper rolled into a baton, and in the station that meant he was either waiting for someone or playing at waiting for someone. People don't often come to stations to pretend, not unless they have a reason. The man kept his distance from the policeman, angling his shoulders, not fleeing so much as slipping between the raindrops of attention. His mouth carried a permanent tension at one corner, a humorless parenthesis. A group of travellers, a family perhaps, formed in a huddle near platform 9, where a train would leave for Nancy in 20 minutes. The man watched them with the expression of someone outside a window, looking in. He did not look at the clock. He watched faces. For a moment he pressed 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist, as if soothing a pulse no one else could hear. Tickets were being clipped at the barrier for the 1932. A woman in a uniform leaned close to the rails beyond and shouted something to a man in a cap, who answered with a gesture. The platform had that expectant feel, like a dog ready to stand but not yet called. The man moved with the slow stream, came almost to the barrier, reached the pocket again. He was not looking for a wallet. Maigret felt that with the same certainty, with which he knew when his pipe was going to go out. The hand was searching for a piece of paper that should have been warm from being handled. Not finding it, the hand folded into itself and hid again. He did not go through. The family did. A porter blew his cheeks out, then blew his nose into a big handkerchief and waved the man back a little without saying anything. The man stepped aside, not offended. He looked along the platform as if someone might call his name. No one did. He turned his head, and for an instant his eyes crossed the buffet. Not focusing, not seeing Maigret, only scanning the bright surfaces for a sign he had not learned to read. Then his gaze slid away. The beer sat in Maigret's stomach like an anchor. He finished it. His feet were tired in that pleasant way that promised sleep. The rain was still drumming a patient pattern on the station's glass. He paid for the beer, set the glass carefully back in its ring, and put on his hat. He passed the ticket windows. The man was there again, near the end of the queue without joining it, looking like a latecomer to a game he had been told was already over. A cashier, head shaking at a joke the next window had made, did not see him. Maigret walked by, close enough that the faint smell of the man reached him. Soap, the cheap kind from a boarding house where the bars shrink to slivers no one throws away, tobacco that was not his own. Outside, the street was a river. He kept to the buildings, letting awnings drum on his hat. His breath made little puffs in the wet air. At Boulevard Richard Lenoir, the trees were black cutouts pasted on a grey wall. Madame Maigret had left the lamp with the green shade on the dining table, and the big dish was on the sideboard, under a folded dish towel. The smell of boiled beef. Aunt Leeks greeted him like a reading chair. "You're late," she said, not reproaching, just noting the facts the way she might note how much rain the geraniums had taken. "Not too late," he said. He flipped the latch on his coat and hung, The water shed in a quick succession of fat drops. She had put his slippers for him where the rug was warm from the radiator. He ate without haste. She asked no real questions. They had that way of exchanging the day that took fewer words than most people needed for hello and goodbye. He told her about the embezzlement, about the boy on line 8. He did not mention the man at first because it was nothing. Then he did. "Is there anything more discouraging," he said, "than a station when it's raining like this?" She smiled, not at him but at her hands, which were smoothing a folded cloth. "There are people who like stations in the rain," she said. "It's warmer than their room, and you can pretend you're going somewhere, or waiting for someone. It's almost the same thing," she said. He allowed that to sit. A drop of broth trembled on the rim of his spoon. The room's heat, and the lamp's shade, and the simple rhythm of her movements made him feel anchored. He smoked in the little salon while she did the dishes. He heard the water whispering in the sink. The telephone did not ring. In bed, with the thick blanket pulled up, he lay on his side and listened to the rain on the courtyard, a patient scratching. Trains far off traded their round whispers. He saw the man under the departure board as clearly as if the ceiling had been a sheet of glass. Not a face so much as a set of small, careful gestures, the mouth that did not know where to rest, the fingers checking for something that had no habit of being in his pocket. A passenger who had not bought a ticket. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. If you live long enough in a city, you collect these shadows, people who seem to be waiting for an answer they never learn to ask for. He turned off the lamp and felt for sleep, with the same gentle patience with which he approached everything that did not come when called. The last thing he thought about before the room became a soft, untroubled shape was that the man hadn't been wet. The detail was stubborn, like a thread refusing to be clipped. In the morning he would go to the office. There would be cases to sign, a coffee that cooled too fast, a joke from Lucas. The city would have changed its shirt, and the river would be down by a finger's width. Somewhere in some station, a train would leave without a man who had meant perhaps to be on it. He slept. The morning came clearer, though not clear. The rain had thinned to a fine flour that hung in the air and settled on the pavement until the stones looked powdered. He woke before the alarm and stayed a minute with his eyes closed, listening for the rhythm of water in the courtyard. It was softer. Madame Maigret put the coffee on the table without ceremony. He ate 2 slices of bread with butter, wiped the knife, and glanced at the window. She noticed, not the glance, but the way his mouth had become thoughtful again. "Are you going by the office?" she asked. "I'll stop in," he said. "Then perhaps a turn somewhere." She gave a small tilt of her head that meant she understood, without needing to know where. He liked that, the quiet way they made room for each other's habits. The air smelled of damp wool and coffee and the faint starch of clean shirts. At the quay, the building had the washed-out look of a place that had not quite woken. Lucas stuck his head in, made a face about the coffee, and handed over a folder. Lonon passed the door in a raincoat that always looked one size too big, and muttered something about influenza and fools who complained of drafts while standing in doorways. There were signatures to put on reports no one would read again. A woman from the provinces had written to ask whether her brother, a tinsmith, had been seen on the Boulevard Poissonnière 2 weeks ago. The boy from line 8 had in fact not been a boy at all, just a slight man who had chosen the wrong pockets. Around 10 he took his hat. "I'll be out for an hour," he told Lucas, not specifying where. There was no need. He walked. The air had that sourness that comes after a night's rain. The river, it seemed to him, was indeed down by a finger's width. Gare de l'Est at that hour had a different pulse from the evening before. Less drama, more errand. Men in blue overalls pushed trolleys with the resigned grace of horses. The buffet smelled of warm bread and onion. The big clock glowed a quiet gold. It was warmer under the roof than outside, and hats steamed like the breath of tired animals. He took a place by the rail that separates those who travel from those who wait and lit his pipe, the first drawer careful. It didn't take long to spot him. The suit, poorly pressed now as if the wearer had slept in it or spent a night on a bench that was not meant to be slept on, moved in the same patient orbit, from the board to the ticket windows to the barrier and back. The hat was the same, too straight. His shoes were dry but dulled, the damp in the air enough to take the shine but not enough to stain. He hadn't eaten. One could tell by the set of the mouth, which grew more precise when the stomach is empty. He still didn't have a newspaper. Ticket clipper stopped him at the barrier, the gesture no more than the touch of 2 fingers on a sleeve. "Votre billet, monsieur." The man gave the practiced little smile. "I'm waiting for someone." At the barrier, the clipper's eyebrows lifted, not unkindly, just practical. The man's eyes slid from the uniform to the rails and back. He stepped away, not offended, and went to the telephone booths. He entered one, took up the directory, let his finger travel down a column. He lifted the receiver and held it without dropping a coin, as if listening would tell him what number to dial. After a moment he hung up, came out and went to the next booth to repeat the little pantomime. The clipper drifted by Maigret and looked without looking. Maigret turned his hand so his card could be seen, but not brandished. The man nodded, half smiled. "He's been at it since early," the clipper said, voice low. "Last night as well. 3 times I saw him put a toe to the barrier and step back. Did he travel?" "Not that I've seen." "He sits when there's sitting to be done. He gets up. When a Nancy train is called, he has no bag. There's always a minute when he looks as though he will choose something and then he doesn't. Trouble. Monsieur, if only all our trouble were like that." Maigret ordered a coffee at the buffet and carried it to a corner where he could see without being seen. The man stood by the consigne, watching the clerk take in parcels and hand out parcels. He approached finally, leaned in, said something. The clerk's head tilted, then shook. A small exchange of words. The man patted his breast pocket and produced nothing. He left the desk with the same steady step and went back to the board. Was watching something narrow, Maigret thought, not the whole. Not the departures to all of France, not the same generalized hunger that suffuses stations. He watched the line where Nancy and Strasbourg were listed, and sometimes his eyes went from there to the doors where people came in from the street. Around noon, the station policeman with the wet knees recognized him and came over, hitching his belt. "You're making ornithology of it, Inspector," he said with a sour smile. "I've seen him naturally." He asked after a coat in the cloakroom that was never his. A coat? He described it as if he had seen it on someone. Else? Brown, with a tear at the hem. He wanted to know if the man who left it had returned. How should we know? And the telephone? Ah, the little rituals. We have men who come here to warm up, some to steal, some to dream. He seems to be one of the dreamers, only he doesn't let himself dream for long. From the telephone. Booths? The man went to the doors and stood just inside, out of the drift of mist that came in when the doors opened, and scanned faces like a clerk checking a ledger. His hand rose to his inside wrist, 2 fingers settling there briefly, the way the fingers of a nurse settle to count. The habit clung to him. When the train from Nancy came in, a small ripple passed through him. Not excitement, more like the way a dog raises its head at a familiar tread. He came toward the barrier too soon and drew back when the iron still stood across. When they opened it, he stayed at the mouth like a man who wants to be near the stove without admitting he is cold. People poured through, men with bags damp at the corners, a woman clutching a hat box, a country priest who blinked at the noise. The man's gaze took each in turn, not avidly, not greedily, but with a persistent hope that tired itself, and began again, the way the rain had. He did not find what he was looking for. He turned away with too much care, as though someone were measuring the steps he took. He headed toward the street. Maigret let him have 10 paces and followed at a diagonal, keeping a column between them when he could. Outside, the air had brightened, without becoming bright. Across the square, a small hotel with a red shade and a glass door that was scrubbed too often stood like a patient donkey. The man went in, came out 3 minutes later with the same expression, neither relieved nor more worried. Maigret crossed after he had gone and pushed the door with 2 fingers. Behind the desk, a woman with hair pinned in a hurry examined him like a parcel. He showed his card, which always had the effect of a slight warmth spreading through a cold. "Room?" "He asked for a letter," she said before he could ask anything. "There is no letter. He asked last night too. There are no letters held for anyone who looks like that. He's not a bad one. He says Madame as if it cost him. He smells of soap." "He didn't ask for a room. He asked prices. He said he might take one later. He looked at the clock twice in 1 minute and then went out as if the air would tell him something that my lobby could not." "And the name on the letter?" She shook her head. He didn't know it. He asked if perhaps, possibly, there was anything left for someone who might be called Victor. Victor what? He couldn't say. "I told him we have a rack. Not a miracle." She smiled, not unkindly. He thanked her and stepped back into the soft damp. The man had returned to the station. He was at the end of the hall now, where the windows let in a weak light that made everything look honest. Maigret took his place again near the buffet, more to be a piece of furniture than a person. He did not plan. He waited. It was his way. The day turned a degree, like a key in a well-oiled lock. When the board began to click for the next round of departures and the 14:05 to Strasbourg showed itself, the man's shoulders tightened by a hair. The thread, barely there, had caught on something. The clicking stopped, and the 14:05 to Strasbourg sat there in clean yellow letters. The man did nothing for a few seconds except breathe more deliberately. Then the small motions began again. The glance to the barrier, as if measuring the distance, the hand to the breast pocket that returned with nothing, the fingers to the inside of the wrist. He did not go to the window to buy a ticket. He went to a place beside the Strasbourg gate where a traveller, if he had a ticket, would present it with the relief of a man showing a receipt. He stood just outside that circle, close enough to feel, the draw far enough that he could claim he had simply been looking. The announcement cracked and softened against the glass roof. People gathered themselves into their parts. A woman fussed with a scarf she had tied too tightly. A man tried to balance a suitcase and a newspaper, and lost both for a moment. A soldier took too big a step and had to retreat when someone moved across him. It was all ordinary and for that reason soothing. The man with the straight hat was not soothed. He moved with the edges of the group, keeping to where the line's breath touched his cheek. It was a small thing that turned him. A coat went by, a brown coat with a fall at the hem that had been badly mended and torn again, the threads making a white smile against the darker cloth. The man's gaze caught exactly there, and the mouth which had not known where to rest stilled. He moved, 2 steps, a pause, another, until he was almost at the shoulder of the coat. The wearer was a fellow in his 40s with a ruddy face, a clipped moustache that looked recent rather than natural, and a parcel under one arm. There was a village air about him, a way of walking that is not quite in a hurry but intends to get there. "Victor?" the thin man said very softly. More. To the coat than to the man. The moustache did not turn. He passed the barrier at the moment the clipper took a burst of tickets in a fan, the steam beyond, giving the illusion that people were dissolving into it. The thin man reached out a hand that could have become a gesture to stop, could have become a question, but at the last second folded into a fist that ached in his pocket. The clipper noticed him. The eyebrows travelled upward a few millimeters. "Votre billet? I I'm not traveling." He moved himself a half-step sideways, enough to make the statement true. A man behind him sighed, and the little stream corrected itself, leaving him on the bank. The whistle sounded once shortly. The man stood and did nothing, and the train took the ones who had chosen and carried them away. Only when the board began to adjust itself again did he breathe as if he had been under water. He went to the consigne with a new, deliberate air, as if he had a task he had postponed too long. The clerk gave him the attention that clerks reserve for men who seem about to make something complicated out of something simple. The exchange was brief and ended with the clerk's palm held up gently, firmly, the way a nurse ends a visit. The man nodded as if scolded, tried a smile, gave it up, and walked away. Maigret let the man's back go and stepped to the little window where parcels and coats become numbers and then become themselves again. The consigne man had a face like a dry sponge. He looked past Maigret's shoulder until the card appeared like a cure. "About a coat," Maigret said without decoration. "Brown, tear at the hem." "It is the season for brown coats," the man said, but without irony. He turned a page of his ledger with a dampened finger. "Last night we took in 2 brown coats, neither remarkable in cut. One had such a tear. Number 418. He tapped not for show, but because he liked to point at the thing itself. "Is it still here?" "It is not," the man said, and there was no triumph in it. "Collected at 8:15. The gentleman had the ticket and a manner of not wishing to stand still. He shook his hand 3 times after signing, as if getting rid of water. He did not smell of drink. He had shaved recently and poorly. He also took a small valise, 419. They had come together." "Together how?" "The one was laid upon the other. We sometimes note such things." He pointed at the faint pencil 41 sur 49 description. The man thought with his eyes down, which is the habit of men who deal with transients. "Shorter than me, and I am not tall. A moustache that does not belong to his face. A scarf, grey. He did not speak much. When he left, he went to platform 5 Strasbourg." "At that hour, yes," the clerk said. "But who can say? People stand in a place and then turn in another direction." "And the other one, the one without a ticket, who asked?" "He has nothing I can give him," the clerk said. He made a little grimace that could have been regret. "He asks as if he were asking a favor for another person, which is rarer than you might think." The description had the dull glow of a nail in old wood, not bright but real. The moustache, the way of not belonging to his own face, it sat well beside the rough mending at the coat's hem. The man at the barrier had not turned when called Victor. The name might have been a try, nothing more. Men who do not know a name might use the one they have heard most recently. Across the hall, the thin man took a seat at the edge of the buffet, where one stands to swallow soup that isn't hot enough to scald, and therefore is not really soup. He counted the coins with that particular shame that attaches itself to small arithmetic. The girl behind the counter left his change on the marble as if it might bruise. He ate with his body small, shoulders tilted forward to keep the food from cooling. The station policeman drifted back with his habitual wet knees and put an elbow near Maigret, which was his way of offering company without demanding it. "I saw him try," he said. "We all try some days." "He knows a coat that left with the 8:15, Maigret said. "Then he knows more than I," the policeman said without bitterness. "There was a moustache on platform 5 this morning. There are always moustaches." They watched a while like men looking at a hearth that burns a little unevenly. The man finished the soup and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then seemed embarrassed by the gesture, and found a paper napkin to correct it. He stood decisively and went to the telephone booths again. This time he put a coin in and turned the dial. His lips shaped words, but he pitched his voice too low for its texture to carry. He said "Madame" once, carefully, the way he had said it to the hotel woman. He listened with his head lowered, as if the words would fall into it. When he came out, he didn't look around. He went straight to the doors. stayed just inside them and watched faces. The habit of pressing 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist returned, but more quickly now, not a count so much as a reassurance. Maigret considered speaking to him, not to interrogate, but to put weight on the air near him, the way a doctor sits at the foot of a bed and sometimes the patient talks because of the chair. Yet he let the idea roll back. The thing had not finished growing. Another train came in, people spilled. The man's eyes rose and fell with them and did not catch. A voice called from behind the glass of the station office, and the policeman, with the wet knees, made a little face. "For you, Inspector." He did not say "if you're not doing anything," because he could see plainly that this was doing something. The office smelled of paper warmed by hands and a faint dust of coal. The receiver was cold and too smooth. Lucas's voice came down it with its practical burr. "Are you at your window, boss?" "I'm near a door," Maigret said. "What have you got?" They pulled one out of the canal Quai des Gemapes near the lock. No identity. Early for floating. He can't have been there long. Nothing in the wallet, because there is no wallet. There is, however. Lucas paused, and one could imagine him looking at a slip through the steam of his breath. A consigne ticket from the Gare de l'Est, 419. The number sat in Maigret's ear like a small thud. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. "They ask if you'll pass by. It's not far if you're already in that quarter." "I am," he said. He set the receiver back, with care as if it might bruise. Through the glass he could see the thin man still posted at the door, the way a man stands when a last, late hope might pass, and he doesn't want to be doing anything that would make him miss it. The station policeman shifted his weight, waiting for instructions he did not need. "Do you want him held?" he asked without looking at the man, which was tact. "No," Maigret said. "Let him wait. He won't go far." He put his pipe back in his pocket unlit and pulled up his collar, which had dried enough to be stiff. Again. Outside, the air was neither rain nor not. It filled the lungs like a drink of water taken standing up. He took the steps without hurry, as if each had a number and it wouldn't do to miss one. The square in front of the station had begun to shine in places where the morning's powder had been rubbed to silk by feet. He turned toward the canal, not because he was sure of anything, but because a thread had been thrown over his shoulder, and he felt it tug. Behind him the station breathed people in and out. Somewhere a man without a ticket pressed 2 fingers to his wrist and resumed waiting. Quai des Gemapes had the particular stillness of water that isn't really still. The lock sides were black and wept in threads. Somewhere metal knocked against. Metal with the measured impatience of a man tapping his foot. People were gathered in that way Parisians do, not crowding but arranging themselves at the edge of what must be seen, so that no one later can say they turned away first. Lucas stood with his collar turned up, hands in pockets, a look on his face like someone who had bitten into fruit that wasn't ripe yet. "There you are," he said, as if Maigret had been expected at the same time as the body. "We pulled him out half an hour ago. Lockkeeper saw him bump along the wall when they let water through. The body lay under a tarpaulin that smelled of coal and old rain. Water ticked from the corner of it with a stubborn rhythm. The medical officer, a neat man with red fingers, stood beside it, the way a well-bred dog stands beside a basket, alert but not eager. "Not long in, this one," he said mildly when the tarpaulin was lifted. "A few hours, 8, 10 perhaps. No marks that don't belong to the canal." The face was of the kind that slips away when described later, mid-40s, hair that had argued with a parting and won, a nose a shade too thick for the mouth beneath it. The suit had tried to be respectable and would, if given a chance. The hem of the trousers showed the lighter thread of a recent turning. The hands were white, in the way of hands that live more with papers than with tools. They weren't soft. There were small nicks by the nail beds, the sort you get from fiddling with things you shouldn't and then pretending you hadn't. At the left wrist, where the water hadn't washed the color entirely, There was the pale brand a watch leaves. The skin looked naked without it. No hat, Lucas said. He may not have come to the canal in his usual way. Suicide? Lognon asked from behind them, miserable as a wet overcoat. He had appeared with that luck he had for showing up where something heavy had landed. It's a day for it. Possibly, the doctor said. They are drawn to water when it has that black look. But if he jumped, he didn't jump from far. No long fall. He met stone, but he met it gently afterward. They turned pockets with the sympathy of men who know pockets can be private, even when the person isn't alive to feel it. A handkerchief, good linen and marked with the thin initial V, the thread not tight enough to have been done by a professional. A packet of tobacco dissolved to paste. Matches that would never light again. No wallet, no keys. Wrapped, separately, in a twist of paper, a small piece of hard candy that had melted into its wrapper, and in the inner pocket, protected by a coin-sized oilskin sleeve of the sort porters sell when they have time to sell, a ticket from the consigne at the Gare de l'Est, the ink smudged but legible. 4:19. Lucas held it between two fingers as if it might drip back into the canal if he weren't careful. Found there, someone thought to keep it dry, not the rest. Not the rest, Maigret repeated, looking at the way the oilskin had been folded. It had not been made for this ticket. It had been used before for something else. He bent and smelled the suit without embarrassment. Canal water, old dust, a little of the soap that lingers longer on certain fabrics than on others. Not a bargeman, not a man of the lock. Something office, something room. The lock-keeper came and stood at a respectful angle, cap in his hands, nails rimmed with black that would never entirely come out. Woke me like a knuckle on a door, he said. 3 bangs and then a scrape. If they give it a body, you hear it different. We shut the gate, pulled him to the ladder. There was a barge below. The man shouted advice as if I had never seen water. Anyone see him go in? Lucas asked. If they did, they're at their lunch and they'll have better stories for you in an hour, the lock-keeper said. He didn't have time to bloat. Pardon, but you see these things. He's a nightman or very early morning. The medical officer nodded at that without looking up. He had a way of agreeing that involved very little movement. Between midnight and 8, I would say. We will know more when I have him on a table that doesn't move. He drew the tarpaulin back up with a small sigh and wrote something with a pencil that had to be coaxed to make a mark on the damp paper. The initial on the handkerchief made a small clearing in the mind. V. Victor, the name that had come at the Y. Barrier like a try and had not turned ahead. Men like to see patterns. Maigret did not trust the urge. He let the letter sit in him without making it a word. He took the consigne ticket from Lucas and turned it. The purple stamp of the station bled under the numbers. There was the smaller round stamp with last night's date. He tried to imagine the movement of hands. A man gives over a valise, perhaps a coat laid on top. The clerk's pencil scratches, 418 sur 419. The ticket is slid across. The man puts it in the oilskin sleeve. Habit, not foresight. Sometime between then and the wet black of the canal, the valise is no longer his to collect. Hold these for me, he said, and the uniform near him understood he meant the pockets, contents, and placed them in a paper sack with the care of a grocer. Lucas, do we have a telephone near that makes no one wait? The lock office had one with a crank that complained. The line to the station wobbled like air over heat. The consigne clerk's voice came, dry even through the wire. Maigret kept his words at the size of an errand. Number 419, he said. Is it on your rack? It is not, the voice said. Collected at 8:15. The gentleman had the ticket. The gentleman signed? A squiggle that the station keeps in a ledger because the station loves ledgers, the clerk said, with an indifference that wasn't indifference, only protection. He shook his hand, perhaps to remove the ink. He had a moustache like a stranger. And 418? Gone with it. Merci, Maigret said, and listened a breath longer to the hum of the line than was strictly necessary before hanging up. He felt the weight of the little oilskin envelope in his pocket, where he had tucked it for a second's look. It wasn't heavy. It tugged anyway. He went back to the body and looked again, not because he expected new information, but because the skin of the thing had changed now that a number attached to it. The watch mark at the wrist, the careful handkerchief marked with V, the pockets cleaned of everything useful and then given back their small, useless things. It did not have the smell of thieves. They don't usually take the wallet and leave. The rest arranged. It had the smell of someone who wanted the man to be found without being named yet. Lognon, who had been avoiding looking at the water as if it might splash him, made a sound that in him passed for thought. If it's a suicide, it's a tidy one, he said. They don't often come with tickets to pick up their baggage. They sometimes do, Maigret said, not contradicting openly, but they don't usually wrap the ticket as if it were the last dry thing they owned. Lucas watched him, and then watched the canal in turn. He had learned over the years that there were moments when the best thing you could do for your superior was to be a piece of furniture that happened to move when needed. "Do you want me to have the clerk bring the ledger?" "Not yet," Maigret said. "He isn't going anywhere." He nodded at the body under the tarpaulin, and it sounded like a remark to the dead man rather than a joke. "Let him be weighed and measured and written down. We will go back to the station and look at people." They left the lock-keeper with his cap in his hands, and the doctor with his pencil and the canal with its old smell. On the way back, the city had put a little light into itself, and the reflection off the wet stones made people's faces look as if they had slept badly. A bicycle went past with a rack of bread, and the boy pedaling it whistled a tune that didn't stick. The hall at the Gare de l'Est seemed larger after the canal. The breath of it came in waves. The clock had only moved enough to make you feel time was being kept. At the far doors, in the place where the outside breath meets the inside heat, the thin man stood. He was exactly as Maigret had left him, except that he had grown smaller inside his suit, the way a coat on a hanger seems less of a coat as the day goes on. Maigret didn't go to him. Not yet. He went to the buffet and asked for another coffee, though he hadn't finished the one he'd had at the lock. He let the saucer grow a little lake. He put his elbows on the marble the way a man does when he intends not to move for a while. The man by the door shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and then, as if he had learned a trick to look like he hadn't moved, put it back again. The board above the gates clicked with the discretion of a woman's rings when she arranges. Cups. A departure shuffled itself to the top. Somewhere in the hall someone laughed twice lightly and then stopped. The policeman with the wet knees made a small circuit without urgently inspecting anything at all. Maigret filled his pipe and did not light it. He turned the little oilskin envelope over in his pocket with 2 fingers and thought about the neat face on the handkerchief and the pale watch mark and the hand that had shaken off ink at 8:15. It was nothing and less than nothing, and it tugged like a thread that had caught on a nail. The man at the door raised his hand to his wrist and pressed, as if counting a private clock that had failed to be there. He let the man at the door go on counting whatever he counted for a minute more, and then went toward him without hurry, as if they were 2 men arriving at the same patch of shelter and deciding it would be simpler to share it. He didn't put his card under the man's nose or his hand on his arm. He took the piece of wall beside him and looked past the glass at the square where a cart went by with firewood piled unevenly. "You came early," he said, as if they had arranged it. "You were here last night too." The man's mouth made the same uncertain parenthesis, then tried a straight line, then gave up. From close by he looked thinner. The beard had come out under the skin and made a faint grey shadow that soap couldn't fix. His eyes were a colour. That changed with the light. Mouse fur, perhaps. "I don't travel," he said. "I come because it's warmer than my room." "There are men who come for that," Maigret said. "You watch the trains to Nancy and Strasbourg. The man's eyes moved without lifting, the way a fish turns in shallow water. He didn't answer. "And you said a name at the barrier," Maigret went on in the same voice. "You said Victor, but softly, as if you wanted only the coat to hear. You knew the coat. It was torn," the man said. The words came out as if they had been prepared and were tired of waiting. "At the bottom, the seam. It was sewn with thread that didn't match. He told me he wasn't good with his hands, that he'd tried. A man like that, the stitches go crooked because his head is somewhere else." "You know him?" "I was to," he said, and his mouth tried again to be straight. "You can call it that. He was to know me. We were to travel together. He said he would arrange it. He said not to be foolish and buy a ticket because he would take care of things. I have been foolish other times, but not this one." He pressed 2 fingers to the thin skin above his own pulse and dropped the hand quickly as if ashamed to be caught at a superstition. He smelled faintly of the soap of boarding houses and of a coat dried too often near a stove. What would he arrange? "Work," the man said after a second, "or a beginning of it." He didn't say it like people who talk big. He said it as if it were a small matter that would be enough. He said there would be papers to carry, and a sample case, and that he would speak for me to his cousin. "I don't ask for much. If someone takes responsibility, I can do the rest." "Where?" "In Strasbourg." He looked toward the letters on the board as if to make sure the place existed. "Or Nancy, if the other didn't happen." We were to keep both in our heads until he said which. "He gave you his name. He gave me Victor because I asked how I would call out. He said I should not shout, that I should say it in a voice he would recognize. He laughed a little at that, not to make fun of me, to make it smaller. He didn't give you his other name. I don't remember if he did. People tell you their names, and sometimes they go in, and sometimes they sit on top and fall." He patted his breast pocket with the old habit that had looked like searching, then let the hand rest there. He wrote things on a scrap of paper. "The time to come, the place to go if we missed each other, a hotel that takes letters. I kept it until the paper turned into paper, and now it is gone." "You asked at the hotel," Maigret said. The man turned his head a fraction. "She is a sour one, the woman there, but not cruel. You didn't sleep there. I counted the money and decided it was better for the benches to have my weight than her sheets. If he had come last night, I could have eaten something. Hot and slept in a bed and not been ashamed of it. It is not that I like to be ashamed, only that it uses less of a man than hope does." "Your name?" Maigret said, without the push that makes a name a demand. "Marcel Picot," the man said, as if the name had waited where it always waited and was content to be called when necessary. 41, born at Niort, bookkeeper. At one time, then a warehouse, then a shop where the shop didn't last. He produced a small wallet that held very little and some papers that were almost papers, the edges polished by fingers. The carte d'identité had a photograph in which he looked almost the same, except that the hat was at a better angle, and optimism, or its cousin, had filled out the mouth. "You don't wear a watch," Maigret said, "because the fingers took E." The wrist had made the remark present. "Not for a year," the man said with a quick, humorless breath. "I sold it. The hand goes there anyway. It is like a man who opens a door that used to be a door and finds a wall." "Yesterday," Maigret said. "At what hour were you to meet him?" "He said he would be here by 7, then he would write if something changed. He told me the color of the coat. I asked too many questions, and he said that sometimes the better thing is to wait until the thing wants to happen. You saw the coat?" I saw what I thought was it. I said the name like a match. I didn't want to strike it hard. The man with the mustache didn't turn. It was a mustache that was painted on and then forgotten. "He collected a coat this morning," Maigret said, still not asking anything. "And a valise." He signed in a way that wasn't a name, Marcel. Picot's eyes lifted and then fell. "Perhaps he is the cousin," he said. But he didn't believe it, and the word perhaps had the frailness of a coin worn thin at the edges. "You telephoned someone," Maigret said. "You said Madame." "The concierge in the passage where I rent a bed," he said, "in case a letter came there. She had nothing for me and told me not to ring again unless I had a franc to throw away." "Where else would a letter be left?" "He told me to ask at the hotel across. He said if we missed each other he would put a word there to tell me which train and where to sit. He said to fold the newspaper to show the advertisement for the cream for chilblains so he would know me. I have looked at that advertisement until I know every chilblain in the drawing. It is a little boy's foot." The attempt at a smile did not quite reach his eyes. He looked at the door again, then at the board, then at his hands, which he had laced in front of him to keep them where he could see them. The hunger had made his skin draw tighter over the bones at the temples. "Will you take a coffee?" Maigret asked. "If I do," the man said, "the coffee will think it is work, and later it will complain that the work was given to it. Better to wait." They stood together another minute. People went past without seeing them. A porter, empty-handed for once, let his arms move as if he had weight anyway. Somewhere a suitcase snapped shut like a book closing on a chapter that hadn't been finished. The policeman with the wet knees came as if he were being pushed by a light wind and stopped just short of them. He managed to look at no one, another of his small kindnesses. "The hotel inspector," he said, "the woman. She says if you remember, you showed her your card. A boy brought a note. She says it is addressed in pencil to V, and that there is something about the 1640. She thought perhaps it wasn't entirely the business of her lobby. She doesn't want trouble that comes in with no luggage and leaves with none." Marcel Picot's fingers opened and shut on themselves. He did not move his feet. He swallowed once as if standing at the edge of water that might or might not be cold. Maigret inclined his head in a way that could have meant anything and everything, and looked at the man beside him not to ask permission, but to tell him he would be walking. "You can come across with me," he said. "There's no law against walking." They crossed the hall with the small steady steps of men who know that rushing always looks like guilt. The square had found a thin light that made the puddles look thoughtful. At the hotel door the glass was as clean as it had been in the morning and smelled of vinegar where a rag had passed. The woman behind the desk looked the same too, except that her mouth had learned a new shape for worry. "It is not my habit to keep letters that aren't mine," she said at once, before he could speak. "But a boy brought it and said the gentleman had paid him, and that if anyone came and asked, I should give it to a man who looked like he was waiting and tired of it. We have 24 such a day. He said the letter was to V, and that it was for today. Today is too much. It is always today." She reached under the desk and brought up an envelope that had been handled by someone who didn't like paper. The pencil marks were thick from having gone over themselves twice. V. The rest was a single line. 1640, P5, derrière la colonne. Marcel Picot did not reach for it. His hands, again laced, tightened so that the knuckles went pale. He didn't ask to open it. He looked at Maigret as if to ask whom such things belonged to when they were brought by boys and put into the custody of anxious women. "It's yours," Maigret said, and he didn't make it a question. He took the envelope with 2 fingers and gave it to the thin man, who handled it as if it might carry heat. He turned it once and then slid the folded paper out carefully, not to tear it. They read the few words together. There was nothing else. No name, no signature, just time and place, and the little instruction that existed because the writer had not trusted the reader to find his own column. Behind them, the clock in the hall let 2 minutes slip like coins. The 1640 was written on the board in the station already. Trains do not change their nature for men or their troubles. Marcel Picot breathed in, held the breath, and let it go. He put the paper back in the envelope and in his pocket without patting it afterward, which was progress of a kind. "It will be the same column as always," he said. "If a man has to hide, he does not invent new hiding places when the old ones have worked." They went back across, not hurrying, and the station drew them in with its warm breath. The policeman peeled away in another direction with the absent care of a man who will still be watching. The minute hand on the big clock moved the width of a fingernail. Somewhere a whistle blew far off, not for them. The column by platform 5 stood just where it had stood all day and all the days before. A small stain on its base looked like a map of a place no train went. The note in Picard's pocket made no weight at all. They took the place behind the column as if they had been told off for a fire drill and did not want to be noticed doing it. The stone was cold through the coat. Air moved under the glass roof in a long, shallow breath. Picard stood a little. Forward, the folded newspaper held at an angle that showed the advertisement with the small boy's foot, as if by accident. He had smoothed the page too many times, and it kept wanting to close. Each time it did, he opened it where it had been, and pressed the crease with the side of his hand, careful not to tear it. The board clicked once, and the 1640 settled into its place. A porter rolled a trolley with a single bag on it, and made it roll as if it were full to keep his back from cooling. People gathered themselves. A woman pulled at a glove that had shrunk at the wrist. Somewhere a child began to fret, and then forgot. "Do you want me visible?" the station policeman asked from the shadow, his knees damp as ever. "Be like the pillar," Maigret said. "Here and not here." Time stretched and then snapped back a little. The minute hand moved. Men, with cases that had been samples yesterday and would be samples tomorrow, took positions the way pigeons do, each owning a section of rail in his mind. No one looked at the column except the ones who had reason. That made it easy. He came at 6 minutes to the hour. Short, a neatness that had been put on like a costume, hair brushed forward to hide a thinning that hid anyway. He wore steel-rimmed spectacles and a dark overcoat that was not new but not tired, the sort of coat a clerk buys along with the hope that it will last 2 winters. His shoes had taken the damp and kept it. The leather had puckered a little at the cap toes. There was a scent that tried to be cologne and would have settled for cleanliness. In his right hand he held a newspaper folded to show an advertisement for a cough tonic. His left hand was in his pocket, weighing something small. He didn't. Go straight to the column. He took a turn that gave him the platforms in a sweep, then came back, measuring not distance but faces. His gaze skipped over Maigret, found the boy's foot on Picard's page, stayed a second too long and moved on as if it hadn't. On his second pass, he slipped behind the column with a care that had been practiced and found what he had come to find. "You're not Vasseur," he said without preamble, the words pitched for stone and not for air. Picard's hand tightened on the newspaper until the page crumpled and the chilblains made a little valley. "I'm the one he was to bring," he said. "He didn't come and he didn't send. There was a note at the hotel with only the letter and the time. He did not take the envelope out as proof. He kept it like a promise." The man with the steel rims looked at the base of the column, as if words had been written there and washed away. "The note was for him," he said, almost to himself. "If he had sent you, he would have written another line." "Then you know his hand," Maigret said. He let the words sit there in a way that did not startle, like placing a cup on a table that already has cups on it. The man looked up quickly, and then down again. He hadn't noticed Maigret, and now he had to decide what to do with him. He made the decision by not making it. "Who are you?" he asked, but without hope that the answer would make things simpler. "Someone who was at the canal," Maigret said. "Quai des Gemapes this morning. There was a man with a handkerchief marked V. He had taken care of a small ticket as if it mattered. We think his name might begin with the same letter as the boy's foot." The man with the spectacles closed. His eyes a second, and when he opened them, the world had lost a little of its bounce. "Victor Vasseur," he said. "You will say it anyway. It is a name like others. It doesn't buy much." Picard had not breathed during that second. Now he did, and it hurt him. He nodded as if to a fact that didn't belong to him. "He told me his name," he said softly. "But I didn't keep it long. It went like steam." "What were you to do with him at 1640? Maigret asked. The note had only the time and the place and the column. Time and place are for people who already know why. The man looked along the platform to where the barriers stood like gateposts to a farm that would never be his. "There's work that minds the clock," he said, choosing the words. "If you sell to the east, you travel at certain hours. If you carry samples, you carry them in a case that looks like a case. If you are a man with a cousin who promises a recommendation, you do not come alone to talk to people who ask questions. You come with someone already known. He was the known one. Without him, I am a stranger." "Your name?" Maigret asked. Not pressing it. "Schneider," he said, and then, as if that were too big to stand on its own, "Anselme, from Nancy by way of Strasbourg when the war isn't in the way. My boss is Meyer et Cie, Quincaillerie, Rue du Faubourg Saint-Martin here, Rue des Serruriers there. You can look at the invoices if you like paper." He pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose with one finger that had a hangnail. "You wrote the note," Maigret said. "I did," Schneider said. "We missed each other last night, or we didn't meet at all. I went to the hotel he had named because I am a man who follows instructions. I left a line because men forget times when they have other things in their heads." He had said, if we were to miss, that we would try the 1640 because the afternoon trains have fewer inspectors who know faces. He glanced at the policeman with the wet knees without seeing him, and then looked away. "And the valise," Maigret said. "There was one." "There is always a valise," Schneider said, with a dryness that might have been humor another day. "They carry samples, knives, screws, locks that do not lock. Mine has 3 sets of catalogues in it, and a case that holds 24 drawer pulls of different shapes for ladies who care about such things. His was to be the same. He said he had a cousin in a small shop who would take on a man, books, orders, moving small things from rail to cart. He said he would speak. If you think it is a crime to speak, arrest me." "No one is arresting anyone," Maigret said. "A man is in the morgue and he had an initial that matches your V. Another man collected a coat and a valise that should have been his. He had a mustache that did not suit his face." Schneider blinked. "A mustache?" he repeated. "I do not know his mustaches. Vasseur was clean-shaven like anyone who wants to look younger than he is. He didn't like hair on his lip. He said it made a man look as if he were hiding his mouth." "Did he say where he slept?" Maigret asked. "When he wasn't missing trains and notes." Schneider hesitated, not because of secrecy, but because of loyalty of the small, ordinary kind. "He wrote a name," he said at last. "La Pomme, Rue du Château d'Eau. It is not a place where the concierge writes letters of recommendation. He said not to come there because it is no place for business." "And the coat with the bad stitching?" Maigret asked Picot, as if to shift the weight of the talking. "Was it his?" Picot nodded. His fingers had forgotten the newspaper and it had fallen shut. "He told me he had tried. When a man tries to sew, he puts the needle in to hurry and he comes out wrong. The whistle blew once for courtesy, and once because the man with the whistle had to. The 1640 moved with a reluctance that belonged to the day rather than the engine. People pushed and apologized and were pushed." Schneider watched the cars go by as if looking might teach him a trick he didn't know. "I was to hand him a ticket," he said without looking away. "My boss allows me to buy for those who come on trial, so there is no question later of accounting. I still have it. It will go back into my own money if it is unused." He took a flat leather case from his pocket and showed the corner of a ticket printed with STR and nothing more. He didn't offer it. He didn't put it away either. "If he is at the morgue," he said, and the words were strange in his mouth, like a foreign sweet, "then I suppose I will go home and tell a cousin I have never met that there is no job." Maigret watched his face settle. It was not grief. It was the collapse of a pattern a man had been building for himself and for someone else modestly. over 3 days. When did you last see him? He asked. Yesterday afternoon, Schneider said, near the cafe by the Canal Saint-Martin where the chairs are always crooked. He said to meet here after I had called on a man in the morning. I did. I am not late often. He did not come. The train had taken its noise away. The platform relaxed by a degree. The policeman shuffled and found something else to look at. Picaud put the newspaper under his arm, as if it had become ordinary again. In the new quiet, the small sounds came out. The drip from a coat sleeve, the cough of a boy who had smoked too early and regretted it, the scrape of a match. "Show me the cafe," Maigret said, not because cafes have answers, but because they have chairs and tables that remember men who sat at them, and the girls behind the zinc who remember the cups men leave. "Then we will go to the Pomme. There is a woman there who will have seen a coat mended with the wrong thread." Schneider looked relieved to be told to move. Men in his line like movement. It turns worry into tasks. "It is not far," he said. "You can smell the canal from there when they open the gate." They walked out of the station together without touching. The afternoon had turned itself inside out to dry. The damp lay low, like a blanket tucked under a mattress. Behind them the station breathed, counting its own pulses with more success than the men who used to wear watches. The column stayed where it had always been, holding up the roof. The boy's foot on the advertisement could not be cured. The cafe had chairs that never settled quite flat on the tiles, and a zinc counter polished with the same rag since morning. Steam rose from a pot that had boiled onions into surrender. Behind the mirror, etched with vines, bottles waited like quiet men. When they opened the door, the smell of damp wool shifted, making space for the smell of wine and old tobacco. Schneider nodded to the woman behind the bar, who had hair the color of walnut shells and hands reddened by water. She nodded back without surprise. He was the kind of customer who came rarely but behaved when he did. Picaud hovered a step inside, and then committed himself to a corner, hat in his hands, as if having a place might make him harder to blow away. "You'll take a bock," Maigret said to Schneider, because such decisions make rooms easier, and ordered one for himself to keep the table honest. Picaud refused with a shake that wasn't pride so much as economy. "Yesterday," the woman said, not waiting for the question because some questions are written on faces. "Yes, he was here, the one with the brow that makes too much shadow." He asked for white that went down like water, and then for another that had more to say. He watched the door as if the hinges owed him money. "Alone?" Maigret asked. At first, he moved when men came in so they wouldn't have to choose whether to sit near him or not. She set the glasses down, then adjusted one so it didn't wobble on a bump in the zinc. And then, a man with a scarf, grey, too neat in the way men are when they have borrowed neatness from a shop window. He tried a moustache, and the moustache tried him, and they hadn't made up their minds yet. I brought them a saucer with 2 sugar lumps, and the one with the scarf pushed it away as if sweetness were contagious. They used the kind of words you can hear in any conversation, and none of the ones that would make you cross the room. He wrote something on a scrap. The other watched his hand without reading. Then they left, one to the street and one toward the lock, as if they had remembered different errands. "Which one had the scrap?" Maigret said. "The shadowed brow," she said. "He borrowed my pencil and chewed it like a child. He was distracted enough to forget to give it back. I like that pencil. It writes dark on the paper strips for the till." "Did he speak names?" She looked up toward the mirror because sometimes names float there. Finding none, she shook her head. "He said cousin once and laughed as if the word hadn't done him any favors. He said Strasbourg without joy and Nancy, as if picking a smaller stone to put in his pocket instead of a larger." Schneider had not touched his. Beer and the foam had gone to lace. He kept still, his spectacled eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance that only he could see. "He was to meet me here," he said softly to himself rather than to anyone else. He left as if to keep that promise. "Later?" Maigret asked the woman. Did either come back? Closing time came, and one man with boots that make puddles came to ask if a person fitting the description of no one had been here. I said all sorts had, and none of the sort he was looking for. He smelled like someone's cat. About an hour before that, a woman came, fox collar scruffy like it had been slept on. She did not ask questions, she only looked, and some people look as if they will inventory your tables. When she left, she took her own reflection with her. She wiped a ring of beer from the zinc with the edge of the rag. There was also a boy. He came before the woman and after the men. He asked if anyone had a note to send to the hotel across, from the station, because a gentleman would pay him if he delivered something there. I told him I had my own errands and no one else did. He went out whistling and seemed no poorer or richer for having asked. "The man with the scarf," Maigret said. "Did he have a parcel under his arm?" "A small one," she said after a second's consideration. "He held it as if it could break or walk away. His hands were careful, but you can see careful." "Made on purpose rather than born that way. And he asked you anything at all?" She smiled with the corner of her mouth. "He asked when the lock opens in the morning," she said. "I told him I sleep then, and if he wanted to know, he could go and make a friend of the lock-keeper. I said the lock opens when men need it, not when clocks do. He didn't like the answer, but he had no other to buy. He paid for his saucer, and left a coin of the kind that makes a noise and not much else." Maigret drank half his beer and set it down as a man puts down a thought he'll return to. He paid and thanked her. She had the look of a person who would keep her life running, no matter which men remembered to come back and which did not. On one, Rue du Château d'Eau, La Pomme looked as if it had decided to be modest and had never changed its mind. A narrow door, a painted sign with an apple that had faded in the middle, a bell that rang with a sharp insistence. The concierge had a cap with a satin bow flattened by duty, and a face that arranged itself into caution without being asked. He showed his card and let it sit rather than wave it. The change in her was not respect so much as relief that someone had arrived who might explain the noise in the corridor and the unusual number of people attempting to carry on conversations in whispers. "Vasseur," she said at once, "because names fill gaps quicker than pronouns. Room 12 to the left where the floor tilts and the window doesn't close like it should. 2 nights. He paid ahead the second day because I looked at him in a way that made him think I would ask. He did not bring a trunk. He was a man who takes his coat off and looks at it as if the coat would have an answer." "He left last night?" Maigret asked. "Around 8, she said, with his hat too straight. He had sewn something badly, and the thread stuck out like a twig. He came back at 11 and went out again at once because a man came up behind him and said something in a voice that would be polite if it had been used more often. They went down the stairs together. The other one had a mustache that didn't belong to his mouth and a grey scarf. If you are cataloguing, you can write that down." "We are," Maigret said. "He kept anything with you? Keys, a paper?" "He gave me nothing," she said. "He asked if the boy came with a message. I told him boys always come with messages, but ours had not. He said he would leave one in the morning if the world had not chosen for him in the night." Her eyes flicked to Picot and slid away without malice. "He is that sort. Those men always think they can speak to the morning." "His room," Maigret said, and the woman pursed her lips and then found the key on its hook. It was a key that remembered more doors than it opened. Room 12 made a shape in the air, a narrow bed with a quilt that had learned other men's names, a chair with a cane seat half broken, a chest of drawers that stuck. The window complained on its sash. Someone had wiped a circle in the fog on the glass with a sleeve, and then let it cloud again. On the small table was a saucer with 2 cigarette ends lined up as if for inspection, and a spool of white thread that had come loose and rolled until it met the lamp base. In the drawer was a needle stuck in a matchbox, as if someone had tried to make it safe and failed. On the chair, a shirt with a frayed cuff, clean enough to have been washed by a careful hand and ironed by someone who at least knew where the iron went. Under it, a folded piece of paper used as a wedge to repair the chair's limp. Maigret unfolded it without hurrying and found an invoice from Meyer Etier that had been used as a place for numbers. Train times written in pencil, 7, 8:15, 1640, initials that might be forgotten attempts, AS and VV, a shape that could have been a P or not. In the corner, a number, 419, and beneath it the little obligation 418 written as a reminder to itself. He let the paper rest on his palm a moment, and then set it back where it had been. In the washstand's drawer lay a pawn ticket from the Mont de Piété, a thin, tired card, date and hour, in the same hand as the one on the invoice. Montre bracelet, it read, 9 francs against redemption. The hour was yesterday, late enough, to be an end to other things. His watch, Maigret said to the heir, he made it into a night. He put the ticket in his pocket now, not because he liked to collect small lives, but because men who die in water cannot argue with the ones who survive on land. "Do you permit women?" he asked, not looking up. The concierge snorted. "We permit everyone," she said. "We cannot afford not to. He had no woman." He looked at women the way men look at shop windows when they don't have money in their pockets. On the floor under the bed, a scrap of paper, coarser, from a notepad. The size of a hand had slid until the dust held it. He fished it out with a finger and the tip of his knife. It had 3 words written too close together in pencil that had been sharpened with a poor blade. Derrière la colonne. The handwriting was not the same as Schneider's neat, timid letters. It had the vertical pull of a man who leans on the pencil to make it do what he wants. He folded the scrap on itself and left it where it had been. Its meaning had already passed into the afternoon. On the sill, the faint ring where a watch had been laid, he might have imagined it. Rooms make rings out of wishful thinking. He took in the smell. Cabbage from the kitchen below, cheap soap, damp cloth that had dried twice and would again. He stood still enough to let the room give him what it chose and no more. "Lock the room," he said at last. "If anyone asks, tell them to ask elsewhere until tomorrow." He said it the way one tells a cat not to worry the plant. It might work and it might not. The cat would be a cat either way. On the stairs, the narrowness made men turn sideways when someone came up. A tenant with a string bag went by, its contents clacking against each other like minor thoughts. At the door, the street put itself against the glass with the sound of tired wheels. "Mont de Piété?" Schneider said, not pressing but ready to move. He had the air of a man who would prefer a list to a mystery. The list would be longer but would end. "In a while," Maigret said. He wanted to pass by the consigne again and let the clerk adjust. Something that had been out of place by a width no one else would mind. He wanted also to sit where the station breathed and watch who came to stand near columns and who did not. He was not yet ready for the official room with its bright bulbs and questions that had to be asked in formal sentences. Picot had followed without a word and now stood in the door as if fresh air needed permission. He was careful, he said, in a small voice. He tried to do things the way men who know how do them. It is hard when you begin to do things right. The wrong way makes more noise, and so you think you are making progress. "Are you hungry?" Maigret asked him. Picot opened his mouth to say no and then closed it. "It is possible," he said. At the corner there was a shop that served cassoulet in bowls that held heat like secrets. He took them in and asked for 2 bowls and wine in a half-liter, because that way the glass looks fuller. Picot ate without performing gratitude. Schneider drank a mouthful and set his glass down with the care of a man making a small promise to himself. They spoke very little. The heat moved back into their hands. When they returned to the station, the afternoon had pulled itself taut like a rope across a canal. The clerk at the consigne looked the same, but his ledger had moved to a new page. Maigret set his card down because it was easier than using words. "About this morning," he said. "The gentleman who collected 2 items, the coat and the tie—" "Valise, you said he had the ticket." The clerk pursed his mouth. "He had a ticket," he corrected gently. 418. The coat. If they are put down together and it is written—" He tapped the ledger with its small proud marks. "Then sometimes we let it go with the 1. The rule says 1 ticket for 1 thing. The rules also say the earth goes around the sun. I have not checked." So the valise number 419 could be taken with the coat if the man convinced you that the 2 belonged to the same pair of hands, Maigret said. The clerk inclined his head. If the number 418 was laid upon 419 and the description matched, and the man did not look like he would make us write a report that would gather dust for a month, yes. He paused and then added, as if making an offering he could afford, "He was the kind who touches his face too much when he speaks." The moustache tickled him. He tried to make friends with it and failed. "And he took the 8:15, Maigret said. "To platform 5, the clerk agreed. "He went that way. After that, the platforms do as they like." Outside the window, the big clock had moved on by a finger's width. The boards clicked. Men with empty hands examined the sky as if it could be relied upon. Picaud, beside him, put 2 fingers to his wrist and then stopped himself with a small shake of the head. The day had taken a shape. It was not yet the shape of an answer. It was the shape of something that would become one if it were left alone long enough, and the right people sat near it without talking more than they had to. They left the consigne with the ledger's neat pencil marks still in their eyes and crossed to the boulevard where the wind had dried the top of the stones but left their undersides slick. The pawn office on the Rue des Francs Bourgeois was open until the bell, and there was enough day left in the windows for the clerks to be patient. Inside, the air had the chalk sweetness of old paper and cloth that has been kept from moths by something that smells like winter. Men stood at the counter with objects in their hands that they had convinced themselves were not precious. He put the ticket down without shoving it, and the clerk brought a look to it that he had borrowed from his ledger. "Yesterday," he said. "Late bracelet watch, 9 francs advanced on it. A gentleman who kept his hat on because he forgot to take it off." "He gave a name," Maigret said. The clerk read from the card as if reading a weather report. "Vasseur Victor, born Chalon, 1904. Current address." He hesitated and smiled a small dry smile at his own formality. "La Pomme," it says. The ones who are not sure of themselves write the name of the house as if that will make it sound more like an address. He signed with a hand that took pains but had no practice. "Alone?" "He was alone enough," the clerk said. He looked over his shoulder when the door opened, the way men do who would like to be remembered by someone else, but not seen by them today. "Did he ask you anything?" "He asked how long a man has to redeem before we sell at auction," the clerk said. "I told him a month. He said, 'A month is certain,' as if he had been measuring days in his head and was relieved to put them down. He counted the francs twice as if they might change their number between his hand and mine. He asked if 9 would be enough for the fee for a letter." The clerk's mouth made a soft shape that might have been pity but wasn't. "Going to grow into anything. I told him letters don't cost as much as people think." He smiled as if he had guessed wrong and didn't mind being corrected by the world again. When they came out, the evening had begun to lay a skin over the roofs, blue at the edges. Schneider pushed his spectacles up his nose again, a gesture that had decided to keep company with him for the rest of his life. "It is him," he said, and the words wanted to be a comfort but weren't. "The morgue," Maigret said. "It's better to know a thing and have it done than to let it stand at your door." On the quay, the building had the hush of a church, where no one will kneel. The attendant wore a black waistcoat that had learned to shine at the seams, and a manner that was not unkindly, but was not prepared to share anyone's grief. The tiled halls smelled clean in the way of places washed with cold water. When the ET sheet came down, it made a sound like paper. Schneider set his jaw and nodded one quick mechanical bob. Picaud stepped forward and then stopped and put his hand awkwardly on the iron rail as if it might pass for something human. He had the look of a man recognizing a face he had learned from a description rather than from life. The handkerchief with its V had been laid aside on a small tray, emptied of any power it might have had when it still lived in a pocket. The medical officer, the same neat man from Gemapes, met their eyes in turn. "No water in the stomach," he said quietly, because some facts need to be said before questions make them heavier. "Lungs wet, as is proper. Bruise on the occiput, not heavy. He met stone after he met water. There are no hands on him that I can see. He didn't fight much, a fall, a push, or a misstep where the edge is treacherous. At that hour, with the black surface, the canal asks and men answer." Schneider pressed his lips together until the color left them. "He was looking for a job," he said, not to anyone, simply to put the sentence somewhere other than inside himself. They wrote names, the living ones, and the attendant made that small grunt that men make when they write. Receipts for bodies, as if that could possibly be what was happening. When they came out, the sky had settled into the hour when lamps begin to be more than decoration. The river moved with the steady patience of something that has heard everything and chooses not to comment. Back at La Pomme, the concierge, emboldened by the card that had sat so calmly on her desk earlier, produced the registration slip without being asked. "You'll be wanting this," she said, and there was a modest pride in holding a document the police might want. So he had no proper card when he came, but men like him always know the numbers of things. He wrote Charlons. He put commis under profession, which could be anything. He wrote no wife and no children, and that doesn't mean anything either. There was a line for next of kin left blank. Under destination, he had written Strasbourg and then rubbed it out with a finger and written it again. He had a visitor, she added, as if passing a plate and not wanting to seem stingy. "This morning, before you came. A woman with a fox collar that had seen better necks. She asked nothing. She looked at the door as if it were a mouth that might open and say something. I said nothing because I am not foolish enough to guess. She went away with the same face she had come with. Did she leave a name? She left only a shape," the concierge said. "She smelled like cigarettes wrapped in peppermint." Schneider looked at the slip as if a little paper could persuade the day to return to its morning. "Fox collar," he said. "She was at the cafe." He did not have to be told to connect one scene to another. Men who sell hardware keep their stock in order. On the pavement they paused, 3 men who did not look like a group until you gave them the trouble of a second glance. The policeman with the wet knees, who appeared where he appeared without drama, came up with his hat pushed back on his head. A little, which meant he had something that would not change the world but might pull at a thread. "A boy," he said, "the one who runs errands. He has a nest near the freight entrance, and he answers to Petit Louis, as most of them do. He carried a note to the hotel for a gentleman who paid him 2 francs and a bit of sugar. He says the gentleman wore a scarf and had a mustache. That was new to his face because he kept touching it like a sore. He says the gentleman made him read the note back to him, even though he knew his own words." "Time?" Maigret said. "Near noon," the policeman said, "between the first pot-au-feu and the second." "Was the writer of the note the one with the spectacles?" Maigret asked. "The boy says no," the policeman said. "He says the one with glasses writes like school, left to write without scaring the paper. This one pressed too hard and made the pencil squeak." The thin envelope in Picot's pocket seemed to alter against his coat. A thing that had been a kindness from one man had become a lure thrown by another. He kept his fingers away from it as if it might bite. They stood then because standing can be useful if you let the air bring you details. Wagons clopped. A woman passed with a shopping basket on her arm that had come down from her mother. 2. Boys argued about who had stolen a marble from whom. They were equally right. "Schneider," Maigret said without turning his head, "your company on the Faubourg Saint-Martin. Is there a man there with a scarf he likes too much and a moustache?" "He doesn't trust?" Schneider's mouth twitched. "In hardware we have every type," he said. "We have men who would sell you your own door latch by telling you it was different. We have cousins and cousins of cousins. We have a ledger that knows them by numbers, and not by virtues. I can ask without making it look like asking." "Do," Maigret said, "but gently. We are not looking for a villain. We are looking for a man who made a choice that was larger than he intended." "And me," Picard said quietly, as if reluctant to take oxygen from anyone else. "What do men do who were to be carried along by other men? Do they tear up their tickets and go home?" "You keep your place in the hall," Maigret said. "You sleep in a bed tonight, I will see to it. In the morning you come to the quay and you sit where I tell you, until something needs the sort of patience you have." He said it without making a promise he couldn't keep. Worrying the man would not lessen his appetite or increase the number of chairs in the world. Schneider went toward his offices with a walk that had remembered it had once walked with purpose. The policeman drifted off, knees damp, as if their conversation had never happened. Maigret and Picot turned toward the station again, because the station had become a room in the house of the day. Inside, the warmth made their coats relent. The big clock's hands had arranged themselves agreeably for people going home to eat. At the barrier to platform 5, the clipper, who had 2 millimeters of eyebrow control, gave a fractional lift that could pass for greeting. "Your man with the moustache," Maigret said, as if it were part of a longer conversation they had been having for years. "If you see him again, grey scarf, hand to his face, do not put a hand on him. Watch which way he looks when he doesn't know anyone is watching. There are men who only look toward the door, and men who look where they left something they aren't sure they should have left." The clipper nodded the way men nod when they're thanked in advance for a job they haven't agreed to do. "We are all looking at doors," he said, "but I know what you mean." A train rolled in and stopped with a hiss that made people talk louder for a moment, as if to prove there had been no silence. Maigret let the steam drift into his coat and out again. He put his hands in his pockets and felt for the little oilskin envelope, the smooth curve of it. The day had come to the place where the facts, coat, valise, ticket, canal, moustache, fox collar, a boy's 2 francs, were not yet enough, and not yet too many. He thought of Madame Maigret's table with the green shade, and of the way she set plates as if that too were a case to be solved by patience. He would go there soon, and she would say something that was not an answer, and would be useful anyway. He stood a little longer because standing sometimes works. The platform breathed. The column behind which men hid did not move. Somewhere a woman laughed once, and then put her hand to her mouth as if to keep the laugh inside for later. He let the station breathe around him a minute longer, then turned out through the doors. The Rue du Faubourg Saint-Martin had begun to shine. Shop windows held their own light, and faces reflected in them looked better than the people they belonged to. Meyer at Sea was a long, narrow store with an iron smell and shallow drawers that slid out like tongues, to show screws that were brothers to one another. A bell rang a chime that had no desire to be charming. Behind the counter stood a man whose waistcoat fit like a promise and whose hair lay in stripes. He had the expression of a man who had learned not to be surprised by anything smaller than a flood. Schneider's name opened the door of his face a little. "He is a good one," he said before Maigret spoke. "He sells slowly, and he sells exactly what has been asked for. He will never make a fortune, and he will never embarrass me." "Victor Vasseur," Maigret said. The man, Meyer, tilted his head as if listening for a word in another room. "Not, ours," he said. He came twice to ask for work, and I told him to come a third time with someone. He had the sadness of the men who have had jobs and lost them without stealing anything. He did not smell of bad habits. I cannot hire everyone who does not smell of bad habits. He told a man at the station that he had a cousin here who would take him on. Maya's lip made the smallest curve. It was either pity or sarcasm, and it dissolved before it could become either. Here there are only cousins by marriage to bolts. We sometimes write letters for men who have worked without making us write letters for the police. It is nothing. Your Vasseur had no letter. In your house, Maigret said, is there a man with a grey scarf and a new moustache who touches his face when he speaks? You could be describing half the men who come to ask for terms, Maya said, but the corners of his eyes tightened a little. He called through to the back, and a boy with ink on his fingers ran the length of the drawers and vanished in a curtain. A minute later he came back with a man who moved his shoulders first, and the rest of himself afterward. Lemoyne, Maya said. East Line. He knows the inns from Epernay to Strasbourg. He owes me 3 receipts and returns with 5. Lemoyne's moustache was thicker than the one at the station, and had clearly decided to stay. His scarf was brown. He smelled faintly of the varnish some men use on their hair. What is it? He asked, the way a man asks when he isn't worried but wants to try the taste of worry. Yesterday evening, were you at the Canal Saint-Martin, a café with crooked chairs, he thought. I stop at many, he said. That one, perhaps, last week. Yesterday I took the 1812 to Meaux. The daughter of the inn there is to marry, and the father is joyful in a way that costs me nothing. Moustache knew, Maigret asked mildly. Lemoyne laughed with his mouth, but not with his eyes. Old as my sins, he said. There is, however, a fellow who tried one these last days, Pommier. He is on trial on the Strasbourg run, and he thinks a moustache will make him trusted because his lip looks like a boy's. I told him to oil the hairs or shave them. Pommier, Maya repeated, satisfied to have a name that fit in a slot. He is too neat, as the inspector says. A scarf he looks at in a window before he buys, and then again in the glass when he puts it on. He has worked 2 months, and he believes the world can be arranged. Is Pommier here? Maigret asked. He left early, Maya said. Said he was collecting a case from the station because he'd left it in Consigne like a fool when the rain came on. A salesman who leaves his samples in the Consigne will soon leave his job, I said. He laughed and said there was a cousin who would learn, and that this was to be the cousin's first lesson. He has a way of borrowing other people's certainty when his is thin. What hour? 8:15, Maya said. He came looking excited like a boy made a banker. He had shaved in a hurry. He touched his lip as if it had decided to be foreign to him. I'll be on platform 5, boss, he said, as if platform 5 were a person I could speak to if I needed to. I told him to bring back the catalogue of locks with the brass plates all bent, because customers thumb them. He said he would bring me 1,000 orders, and I told him one would do. He has not come back. He wrote a note with a pencil that complained, Maigret said. Maya shrugged. He writes as if pencils are to be punished. He will never be a bookkeeper. We will be quit of him or he will improve. It depends on whether he wants to eat. Does he owe anyone? Maigret asked. Everyone owes someone, Maya said, but his eyes softened a little. He has a mother in Montreuil who sends him money he returns when he can. He has a room where the concierge calls him Monsieur, even when he cannot pay because she likes his shoes. He is not bad. He wants the feeling of being a man men trust. He wants it quickly. Outside, the air tasted of iron. On the way back to the quay, he sent the boy with the inked fingers to the corner to telephone Lucas. Pommier, he said, ask quietly. A room, a mother in Montreuil, a fondness for scarves. Put a watch at his door without shaking it, and keep a man in a corner at platform 5, not to grab, to see which way he looks when he thinks no one is watching. At the office, Lognon had left a note in a hand that had never learned to be graceful, complaining. that the canal made him cough, and that bodies in water chose days that unsuited his lungs. Lucas sat on the edge of the table like a boy with homework. Pommier Emile, he said, 28, mother in Montreuil, a widow who makes hems straight on other people's skirts. Room in Passage Rance, 3rd floor, on a landing that smells like cold soot. He has not been seen since morning. The concierge says he grew a moustache and told her it made him serious. She said he should sit up straight instead. He has a case with him that he did not have yesterday and a grey scarf. That looks better than his coat. Anyone ask for him? Maigret said. Only a woman, Lucas said, fox collar badly kept. She asked at noon and again at 4. She did not leave a name. The concierge says she walked like a person going from one piece of bad news to another and trying to rearrange them by sequence. Post someone at the door, Maigret said, not to frighten the mother if she comes, and see the boy Louis again. Ask him if the man with the moustache smelled of cologne. If he did not, ask him what he smelled of. Boys know those things. He put the small oilskin back in the drawer and locked it, not because he feared it would run away, but because locks exist for something. The hallway had darkened into that evening blue Paris keeps for itself. He went home without hurry. The apartment was warm in the way of rooms that have been looked after all day. There was a smell of leeks and something that had been in the oven and then taken out at the right time. Madame Maigret set a plate down as if she were setting down an argument that it was no use making. "You'll be tired," she said, without asking. "A canal is always a little heavier than a road," he said, and sat. He ate a mouthful and a second. She poured wine and did not ask a question, which had the effect men sometimes think questions will have. "A man touched his mouth too much today," he said after a while. The moustache was new to him. He collected a coat and a valise that were not his with a ticket that belonged to someone else. He wrote notes with a pencil that made a noise. He wanted to be taken for someone who had the right to arrange things. She sat back. She had a way of thinking with her hands folded, not to hold them still, but to give the rest of her more room. "Men who change their faces," she said, "do it for those who already know them. Otherwise there is no need. If he grew his moustache, he did not want to be seen by someone he sees often." He drank a little and let that sit. At the station, he touched his lip, he said. At work he told his boss what platform he would be on, as if he wanted that to be known. Perhaps he wanted someone else to overhear, she said, or to know where to find him without coming to his house. "Someone with a fox collar," he said. She smiled, not pleased, only because the world had again arranged things in its usual way. "A woman with a fox collar that is tired will get tired of a man unless he becomes somebody else," she said. "If he says he will be on a platform and she has not wanted to be seen at his room, she will go to the platform. It is easier to be respectable in a public place than in a stairwell." She got up to take the bread from the warmer and set it down. "If she is looking for him and he is looking to hide from someone else, they will not meet. That is what happens to people who arrange too much." "And the column," he said. "Men who ask to meet behind a column want to see and not to be seen." Vasseur had that written on a scrap in his room. The same words were on the note at the hotel, but written by another hand. She poured him coffee and put the sugar near him, knowing he would not use it. "Then one of them learned the other's habit," she said. "It is the sort of detail one man tells another when he wants to make him feel they are the same, or when he wants to prove he knows him better than anyone else." He thought of the scrap in Vasseur's room, the one written in that tugging upright hand, and of the bold pencil on the hotel note, and of Schneider's careful letters. He thought of the little ring on the sill where a watch might have rested, and the pale band on the dead man's wrist. "He sold his watch for 9 francs, he said. He wrapped a claim in oilskin. He would not have given away the ticket he kept for the valise. He gave the other, the coat. He trusted someone. Men trust with the things they think unimportant," she said. "If the valise had work in it, and the coat had only warmth, he would give the coat. Women do the opposite." After coffee, he sat a while without his pipe lit. The rain had held off, leaving the air with a taste like iron keys. He telephoned Lucas and kept it short. "Pommier will come back if there is. A woman. Let the fox collar find our man for us. Put someone at the cafe and someone at platform 5 and someone at passage Ronce. No one bothers anyone. If they quarrel, let them quarrel." He slept, but not deep, the way a man sleeps when he has left doors open in his head. In the morning, the sky had put on a new shirt and was pretending it hadn't worn the old one. At the quay, the coffee was worse and the air was better. Lucas had the look of someone who had been out and had not found what he was looking for, and therefore had decided to find something else. Petit Louis says the man with the moustache smelled of hair oil and tariff tobacco, he reported. He says the man's hands were clean, but the nails had a little grey under them from screws. The mother in Montreuil exists. She cried as if someone had told her she had mislaid a child. The fox collar went to passage Ronce at 8 and went away again at 9 with a mouth set like a drawer you've shoved too hard. "And the station?" Maigret said. "The column is still holding up the roof," Lucas said. "Our clipper says if Pommier comes, he will turn his head to the left first, toward the cafes and not the trains." Maigret put on his coat and took his hat. He did not say they would go to watch. They always went to watch. Outside, Paris had the look of a woman who had decided the day would be decent enough, and in front of the station, a cart of vegetables had made a small green field in the square. The boards would click as they always did. The column would still be there. Somewhere a man with a new moustache would be trying not to touch it and would fail. It was not yet the hour when anything must happen. That, he had learned, was often the most useful hour. The hour had that idle look he trusted. People were not yet late, and those who feared to be had already hurried through. He took his place near the buffet where the marble remembered glasses set down too hard. Lucas kept himself a few paces off, looking at the clock as if it might ask him to fix it. The policeman with the wet knees had found a post from which he could see the left side of platform 5, without giving the right away. Picard, washed and with a collar that had been ironed by charity or pride, sat where a man sits when he wants to be found, if fate is merciful. The clipper gave the signal a man gives when he is not sure he is signaling at all. A slight widening of the eyes toward the doors. He didn't so much arrive as try the hall with his weight, as if seeing whether the floor would hold him. The scarf was grey, as described. The moustache, still new to his mouth, had made a pact, with his lip only for the morning. He had a nervous way of stroking it with his thumb, then remembering not to. He looked left first, toward the cafe fronts beyond the glass, and then to the board, then at the pillars. He carried nothing but a flat case under his arm, the kind that refuses to admit it is heavy. His shoes were polished with the sort of vigor that attends remorse. A fox lifted its tired head. The woman in the collar had come by another door, the one near the tobacconist. She paused a beat when she saw him, then moved in that straight line women make when they have rehearsed and chosen not to change the words. He didn't turn his head to look at her. His shoulders did it for him, and that gave him away. "You said you would not be foolish," she said, low, and the fur made a small dry sound as she moved. "You said I would not have to find you in places where men spit." "I am here," he said, and it came out almost like a question. His fingers went to the moustache and fell without touching it. "You said platform 5, she went on, not as accusation but as proof that she had listened like an ally and not a wife. You said a cousin would be made of you if only someone would say the word. Did you make yourself a cousin last night at the water?" He didn't answer, not because he chose silence, but because the question had gone too near. He glanced at the pillar, then at the case. The fox collar breathed like a small old animal. Maigret stepped into their little weather the way a man steps from shade to sun, careful not to make it seem abrupt. He said the simplest thing he could, because simple things leave fewer marks. "Walk with me," he said. Just to the buffet where the coffee is poor and no one stares because staring is work. They went, the three of them, at the speed of ordinary people crossing a hall with nothing to hide, only that they all tried to take the inside of the aisle for a second and then yielded at once, and that was enough to tell a man watching. At a corner table, the girl brought cups without being told, because she had already decided they were the sort who would sit and not make a mess. The case leaned against Pommier's chair. His hand stayed on the edge of it, as if it might skitter. "Away! You collected a coat and a valise at 8:15, Maigret said. "One ticket. The coats. The numbers liked each other, and the clerk allowed it." Pommier nodded, a small tilt that kept the mustache from moving. "They were put down together," he said, as if he were defending a friend. "I told him they belonged to the same man. It was true." "Whose man?" the woman said, soft. "Yours." Pommier looked at the case. "I meant to carry them for him," he said. "He had asked me to. He said he was no good with parcels, and that he would get himself searched at the barrier looking for the ticket in the wrong pocket. He laughed as if it were modesty. I told him I had 2 hands. You wrote a note to the hotel," Maigret said. "At noon. You had a boy read it back to you. The pencil complained. He tried a smile that knew better and then let it go. He would have missed the time if I didn't write it," he said. "He did miss it. He missed everything after a certain hour. Schneider says he wrote one last night," Maigret said. "He is a man who writes like a ledger, neat lines. Yours was not like his. The woman at the desk gave the one that arrived." Pommier's thumb made a small, guilty pass near his lip. "I went to the desk too," he said. "Earlier. I asked if there had been a letter for V, and she said no. So I made one, to keep the air from going out of the day. Then I thought, if he came I would say I had been exact. If he did not, I would go on being exact until someone else believed me." The coffee cooled because it had been asked to be more than coffee. The woman's mouth made a line and broke. It then made it again. "You went to the lock," Maigret said, "and put nothing on the word to push it along. You asked at the café when it opens." "I am not a man for water," Pommier said. "I did not wish for the dark." "He said the lock-keeper would make fine noises with his gate when the hour came. He liked sounds, that kind of man. He said we could meet there, and that there would be fewer men asking to sell you something you already own." He took a breath. That let itself out too quickly. It was late. The water had learned to shine without light. He asked for money, just to bridge the morning. I told him I had none because I had given the scarf to the woman. He glanced at the fox collar, as if he had named it. "And because I had had the mustache cut for 6 sous, which was dear at the price. He said I was a man of appearances, and I said he was a man who sells his watch and keeps a ticket dry. It made him proud when it should have made him ashamed." "You quarrelled," the woman said, but without surprise. She had had the story in her pocket and only wanted the words. "We spoke too near the edge," he said. "That is what happens." He put his foot back and the stone gave like a heel on a rotten stair. I put a hand. He did not take it. He went. In on his side. There was a sound at the gate, and for a second it was not us on the world. Then it was only us. He did not shout. He made a face the way men make faces when they remember a joke at the wrong time. He stopped. Not because he had finished, but because he had reached the end of what he could say without undoing something inside himself. He set his thumb finally against the moustache and forced it away again, as if punishing a child. "You went away," Maigret said. It was not a question. "I went to the wall and I held the iron," he said. "I waited for someone to come who was not me, because that would be better. No one came. After I walked to the station because I had said I would be at the station. I had said platform 5 and a column and a time. I thought if the day did not change its plan, perhaps the night would learn from it. I took the coat and the case because the coat would be given to anyone if I didn't, and the case had inside it catalogues with my boss's prices. I thought, I will put them in a safe place and then say, I have not stolen anything, only kept it. Safe, I thought. If I look like a man who knows what to do next, I will become him. He looked at the woman's fox, and then at his hands, which had found each other on the table and held on. The woman did not cry. She breathed very steadily, for a few seconds, as if showing someone how it is done. You promised me, she said, and there was no anger left in the words, only the memory of having put them in him. You promised me you wouldn't be the first to leave when things got hard. You promised me you would be the kind of man who stays for the last word. I stayed, he said with a kind of pleading that felt like shame. I am here. You stayed where there was light and people, she said. It is not the same. They let the silence stand. Men came and went. A boy at another table slurped noisily, and was corrected once and then not again. The clipper passed the corner and did not look at them, which was courtesy. You will come to the quay, Maigret said, and it was not a threat and not a favor. You will say what you have said, and the doctor will say the rest. No one will call you murderer. They will say you left a man in water and you took things that were not yours, and they will ask why. You will answer. You will not try to be exact any more. You will be true. It is the only thing that spends. Pommier nodded. In that small way he had. The moustache sat on his lip like a guest who had overstayed. I will come, he said. I have the habit of not sleeping when I make plans too large for me. This one is large enough to end the habit. The fox collar shifted again. The woman's shoulders dropped a fraction. I'm tired of standing at doors, she said. If you go to the quay, I will go home and boil something until it becomes food again. I won't come to watch you speak. I can't. But I will put your scarf where you keep it because you cannot find it alone. He had no answer to that, which was as it should be. He stood and picked up the case as if it had forgiven him for having made it complicit. Maigret got up too. They walked again 3 abreast, this time with the inside and outside of the aisle settled between them. At the door, he turned to Picaud. You will come after, he said. Not now. You will take the room I spoke of, and the bed in it. Sleep reaches men quicker if they are horizontal. Tomorrow you will sit in a chair at the quay that has a number, and you will tell me again what you told me yesterday, and we will see if a cousin can be made out of you, without anyone having to borrow the word. Picaud nodded and touched his wrist out of habit and then didn't, which was also progress of a kind. The policeman with the wet knees fell in behind them at a distance a man keeps when he will be needed in a minute, and not before. The platform breathed, the column held, the board clicked. Outside, the air had decided to be neither cold nor warm. He did not look up at the clock. He knew where the hour was. It had the shape of a man walking alongside him, not resisting, not leading, only matching his steps. They walked across the square without speaking. At the quay, the building smelled of wet cloth shaken out and of old paper that had decided to live forever. A clerk took the case and set it on a chair as if it might bite. When he opened it, it was all catalogues and brass that had been thumbed until it shone. Pommier sat with his hands in his lap and answered what was put to him without embroidery. He did not try to make himself better or worse than he was. He told it again the way he had at the station. The lock, the foot that slipped where stone, has the habit of giving. The moment he waited for someone else to arrive and make it not his responsibility. The coat and the valise taken because a man had to do something with his hands. The note, written at noon because the morning had not given him a sign. He spoke as if reading a list from a wall. When he stopped, there was not much air in the room, but it was clean. Lucas had the boy Louis in a chair with a glass of sugared water that he drank between statements as if it improved his memory. He pointed at Pommier without enjoyment. That one, he said. He made me read it back. He pressed so hard the pencil squeaked. He gave me 2 francs because I did it without pretending I didn't know my letters. The lock-keeper came. Wen called and described the night with the practicality of a man who knows water. The medical officer's clean notes had nothing in them that would quarrel with the story. There were no marks that shouldn't be there. The bruise was the kind stone leaves when a man finds it too late. Schneider came, spectacles fogged from the damp, and confirmed the small, tidy facts of his portion. He had left a line at the hotel. His letters were neat and did not squeak. He had a ticket in his wallet he had planned to give to a man who would no longer travel. He put it on the desk and did not pick it up again. The woman with the fox collar came to the door of the corridor and then stopped, as if the air were thicker beyond it. She did not ask to be let in. She waited long enough to see Pommier taken in to sign the paper that said he had said what he had said, and then she went away without lifting her face. When she passed the desk, she put a small brown parcel on it, without explaining. Later, someone opened it and found inside a scarf, grey, folded as if by habit. The charge would not be the one that filled the newspapers. There would be no headline that used the word murder. It would be the wearily precise phrase for leaving a man when a hand might have made the difference, and the smaller, sadder, one for taking custody of things that did not belong to you. The brass in the case counted against him not at all. It was only brass. A magistrate would arrange the rest, moving it into the slots the law provides for such days. Until then, they put him in a cell that had seen worse men and better men and did not comment either way. He asked one question before the door shut. "Should I shave it?" he said, touching the mustache at last and not pulling his hand away. "No one will notice it tomorrow," Maigret said. "They will only notice that you slept." In the anteroom, Schneider stood as if the door had a magnet in it. He had a way of waiting that did not claim attention. He had brought a paper folded very small. "About the other one," he said, and he nodded toward the ghost that still stood in every conversation. "I have no cousin. I have a boss who will listen when a man like me says a name twice. If the one who waited—" He did not look at Picard, because he had already looked. "Enough is still where he was told to be at 9 on Monday. I will take him to the Faubourg and put a pencil in his hand. We will see if he can write a price without making the paper wince. It wasn't a promise, not the sort a man can hold the world to. It was better." Picard nodded, not daring to let hope make a movement with his mouth. His fingers, out of habit, and then out of willed restraint, did not go to the empty wrist. There were calls to make that weren't urgent and small forms to sign that always found their way to him. The afternoon softened at the edges. Longyon put his head in to say something about rheumatism and water, and the folly of men who stand near canals when they don't have to, then pulled it back as if the corridor might cough at him. The typist flattened a stack of paper with the heel of her hand, satisfied with its new shape. At 6 he went home. The street was not wet and not dry. The stones had that scuffed polish feet give them when a day has not chosen a weather. Madame Maigret had put a stew to the simmer, and it had done what stews do when no one interferes with them. She looked at his face and poured the beer without asking for the story. They sat. He ate, and the heat of it went into his fingers and into the place between his shoulder blades, where the cold of the morgue lingers. When he was finished, he moved into the other room and found the green shade where it always was, and lit his pipe and then didn't draw from it for a while. He told it then, but without the need to put weight on any one piece. He described the lock and the way water has of asking questions in the dark. He described a pencil that squeaked, and a moustache that never made itself at home, and a man who sold his watch and wrapped a little ticket to keep it dry. He mentioned a fox collar that had made the rounds of the quarter like a worried dog. He said Picard's name last, as if to make it stay. She listened the way she always did, quietly and to the end, and when he had finished, she sat a little while, with her hands on her knees, smoothing imaginary creases in the cloth. "It is a good thing," she said, "when a man waits where he was told to wait and someone comes. It does not happen often. Mostly men go away and later they say they didn't hear. Perhaps he will not have to count his pulse so much." He nodded. It seemed to him that there was no villain in what he had seen, only a string of small, ordinary appetites and embarrassments, men arranging themselves as best they could under a roof that did not belong to them. One had made a new face for a day and found it didn't fit. One had borrowed a word like cousin because it opened doors without making anyone responsible. One had kept a little square of paper dry because it felt like a plan. It had been enough to bring them all into the same hall, that lung that breathed them in and out. After a while he went back out. He had the habit of ending certain days where they had begun. The station was different at that hour. Lamps were stronger than daylight now, and the big clock looked more sure of itself. He stood near the buffet and watched the small countries of family and solitude pass under the roof. The column held up its part of the sky with the same patience as always. Picard came in, clean collar at his neck, and a hat he had brushed until it was only hat. He went to the ticket window, not as a man buys a journey, but as a man greets an old idea. Schneider appeared behind him a minute later and took his elbow without ownership. He said almost nothing to the clerk and pushed coins across the glass. When they turned away, Picard had a rectangle of paper in his hand that looked as if it had belonged there. He did not put it in his breast pocket at once. He looked at it as a man looks at a letter with his name on it, and only then folded it and tucked it away, this time with a little pat. He did not touch his wrist. He did not look around for anyone to approve of him. He stood a moment and read the board. The letters spelling Nancy and Strasbourg were only letters now. He and Schneider did not go to a platform. They went to the door and out into the evening with their coats buttoned. Work begins long before the first train. He watched them go until they turned the corner, and he had to imagine them afterwards. The clipper passed him and made the small lift of the brow that had served for greeting all day. "Your man with the moustache?" he asked without stopping. "Will shave," Maigret said. He let the station's breath move through him and then left it to itself. Outside, the air had taken on a taste of metal and baking from some place he could not see. He walked home. From the river, a train's round whisper came up and embroidered the edges of the evening. At the apartment, the room had kept his chair warm. He sat and finished the pipe he had not smoked earlier. Rain started, not much, only enough to write in a faint hand on the windows. He thought of the coat with the stitching that went crooked, because the man who held the needle had been thinking about something else. He thought about the little oilskin envelope and how, in the end, it had only been a way of saying a man hoped to be the sort of person who didn't lose things. He didn't feel clever. He felt, as he often did when a day had ended without shouting, that he had stood where he was needed long enough for people to be who they were. It was enough. He knocked his pipe out gently and listened to the rain as it learned its rhythm. Again on the zinc roof, and on the wide back of the city, and somewhere under glass and iron, on the column that held up a piece of sky for passengers who bought tickets and for the ones who did not.